This is the Sony a6700, and it's the update to the a6600, and they added some cool features.
Yeah, this is their top-end APS-C camera, the most capable. It does 11 frames per second, like the a6600, but it will do 4K at up to 120 frames per second, so they've greatly increased the video capabilities. And they've changed some key things, like now they have a flip forward screen.
Yeah, they also listened to people's feedback on the ergonomics, so they changed the record button for video to a more easy to access place, and they changed some of the dials on the back to make them more ergonomically friendly.
And of course, we got the updated menu system that we've seen Sony rolling out to all the cameras, which is way better. It also keeps the old form factor, which is a rangefinder style form factor, which people love or hate. But I love it because it doesn't smush my nose.
I like it too. It's big nose friendly for me.
We're going to compare it against the a6600, but maybe more importantly against the Canon R7, an APS-C camera at the same price point that has some key advantages to find out if Sony still got it or if Canon has taken them back. But first, I want to thank our sponsor, Adorama. No matter what gear you buy, you should shop at Adorama because they truly understand photographers. For example, if you go and pick up the Canon R7 here, you can choose to throw in a bunch of free accessories like a memory card and a battery, and that is money in your pocket. Or you can join their VIP program, which I'm a member of, and they will give you points. And you can use those points to buy more gear, and that is money in your pocket.
They have a deal of the day. It's exciting to go in and see what's for sale. And if you like photography, it's comprehensive. They have computers, they have lighting, they have tripods, they have everything you could possibly want in one place with a cool point system. You can't go wrong.
Thanks for sponsoring us, Adorama. As a reminder, we've never accepted money or free gear from any camera or lens manufacturer. That's why this is completely unbiased. Show your support by supporting our sponsors like Adorama. Thanks, guys. First, I want to talk about handling.
I think that the handling for the a6700 is better. They really listen to our feelings about the ergonomics of their cameras, and look, they put different dials in different places.
And you've got two dials here, shutter speed and aperture, whereas this one has only one, and then you have to use the kind of flimsy back dial.
Right. So I think the handling is overall better, and they also have the nice flip and tilt screen, which is nice.
But how do you feel like the handling compares to the R7, which is an SLR style with the viewfinder in the middle?
This definitely does feel like an SLR. If that's something that you're used to, it's very Canon. So if you're already in the Canon system, you will feel comfortable here. I think both are ergonomically good, and it just depends on what you're used to, basically.
The R7 here has one big advantage, which is it has two memory card slots. Whereas both of these Sonys, they only have one card slot. One card slot's a little tough for me to swallow at this price point. I think it's the price point where people are taking some professional shots, you're doing things you really care about, and having a memory card fail could be really painful. But if you don't care about that, the Sony is fine.
Well, I care about that because we had a memory card fail while we were shooting this video. So it does happen, and it can ruin your day.
Why don't we start the testing and take some pictures?
Okay.
We're in Rocky Neck State Park to talk about wildlife photography.
The first thing I noticed when I was taking wildlife pictures with the a6700 is that the autofocus wasn't working very well. But then I discovered it was actually my mistake, because if you put it in animal plus bird autofocus, it doesn't pick up birds as well as if you just put it in straight up bird autofocus. And once you do that, the autofocus is excellent.
Okay, but the R7 got similar autofocus, and its animal mode covers both animals and birds. And I find that convenient because I often go from shooting a mammal of some kind, a squirrel, a chipmunk, a deer, straight to birds and back and forth. And sometimes an animal just pops up out of nowhere and you don't want to go in and change the setting. So I think that's actually a win for the Canon.
Yeah, I do think that's nice, but if you do have the Sony, it doesn't mean that you're going to have worse autofocus. You just have to change the settings a little bit sometimes. The other thing I noticed is that the rangefinder design makes it a little different when you're trying to find animals in the viewfinder. If you're used to having your viewfinder in the center, it might just take a little bit for you to adjust to finding things in the frame.
I think the R7 is a better setup for wildlife with its SLR style design, with the viewfinder lined up with the lens. Other advantages, like 15 frames per second with the mechanical shutter, so no rolling shutter there, or 11 frames per second on the Sony. I can't believe Sony is behind on frames per second. I kind of thought this was going to be our baby A1, and that kind of didn't pan out.
Yeah, but mine is quiet when I'm taking pictures, and yours is very loud. Like, take pictures. Yeah, I'm taking pictures too. So if you want it to be quiet and you don't want rolling shutter, you might still want the Sony.
You're right, that's better at being silent.
I'll also say I thought that my viewfinder was a little clearer. We'll have to confirm that with numbers, but I thought it looked nicer.
This has more megapixels too, at 32 megapixels versus 26. And whether you see that in the real world, well, let's take a look at some pictures now. I was hoping the extra megapixels in the Canon would produce sharper images when zoomed in, because so often in wildlife photography you have to crop heavily. But I just don't see it. Like, the challenge is in the real world, even with $13,000 lenses, atmospheric conditions reduce the sharpness enough that you probably won't see any sharpness differences. Thus, for image quality, it's a draw. But other factors like frames per second and handling might make a bigger difference.
One thing you have to consider though is that Canon is blocking third-party lenses. That means if you want to buy a brand that is not Canon and save some money, you can't anymore. With Sony, you can. So if you're looking to save some money in that regard, Sony will be your better option.
Yeah, but they both have pretty good just native name brand lenses available. Like, I like Canon's wildlife lenses. The 600 f4, we use the 100 to 500 a lot, and we really like, I definitely use the 600 f11 on this APS-C R7, and we've gotten good results with that. So you might be okay with what Canon has.
I mean, my eyes like the Canon lenses. My wallet does not.
Yeah.
And that's where it's going to be an issue. If you're looking at the whole system, glass and the camera, and you're on a budget, you'll want to consider that, where you can save money with third-party lenses.
And I hate to harp on it, but the R7 has 2 card slots. And I kind of require that for wildlife because, you know, you might spend months waiting for the light and the animal to do the perfect thing. And then you get home and your card has failed. Like, that could be really heartbreaking. So I always do wildlife to 2 cards.
Yeah, but my main takeaway is that if you were a DSLR shooter shooting in this price range, if you move to these cameras, you're going to be blown away. You get your subject in the frame and hold down autofocus, and it does all of that tracking for you without you having to move your tracking point around. You're going to be really happy with either of these cameras for wildlife, I think.
Compared to the previous gen Sony, the a6600, the a6700 is actually a pretty big upgrade. Like, the frame rate is the same, but the autofocus system is entirely new. The a6700 will spot birds against a crowded background, whereas with this, it doesn't have bird IF. It has animal IAF, but not bird IAF, so you just end up using a single tracking autofocus point. It works okay. It's very much like the DSLR world, and if it's a bird against an empty sky, it works fine. But it's when you're picking out a small subject against a crowded background of trees, I would much rather have the a6700. So if you're a wildlife shooter thinking about upgrading, I think it's a really good win for you. And now to test sports. We're going to attach a 70-200 f2.8 to each of the cameras, and then one of us is going to run up the baseline here, and we'll count how many frames it gets sharp. So it's extremely hot and humid today. In Celsius, it's about 120. Celsius is the universal standard measurement based on Fahrenheit for how Chelsea feels the weather is.
Yeah.
And what do you say, 120 or so?
Like 300 degrees.
300
you
degrees
could bake
Celsius.
cookies out here. Best out of 3, always.
Okay, well, it's not fair. I would have dropped the camera if I'd done anything except a rock.
Yeah.
So I feel like, I guess I'm running. I really am gonna die. You get to see me die on camera.
Some people have been waiting for this moment, Tony. You're gonna run that far?
Maybe I'll start at the base. Let me know when you're ready.
Okay, ready? Go. Oh my gosh. Honestly, if you can't get great pictures of your kids' sports with this, then there's no hope for you. Go. That was good. Ah, that breeze feels good. Go. I don't think that was as good. That's missing your eye a lot. We don't know how to dress either. That's a part of the problem.
First, I examined the autofocus accuracy. The Sony a6600 got 71% in focus, the a6700 got 83% in focus, and the Canon R7 won, getting 86% of the photos in focus. The more meaningful number is the sharp shots per run. Here, the a6600 got 34 sharp shots per run. The a6700 came in with 42.5, a significant improvement considering they have the same frame rate. And the Canon R7 came in with 66 sharp shots per run thanks to its high autofocus accuracy and that higher 15 frames per second with the mechanical shutter. So for sports shooters, Canon here is a big win, but if you're a Sony shooter, it would be worth upgrading. If you're concerned about rolling shutter, I have some bad news. The a6600 had a pretty bad rolling shutter readout speed of 46 milliseconds. That's enough that you wouldn't want to use the electronic shutter for any moving subjects. The a6700 was a big improvement, almost reducing that by half to 25 milliseconds. So it would be much more usable, but that's still pretty slow. You could shoot a wedding or concert silently, but I probably wouldn't want to shoot golf silently with it. The Canon R7 split the difference, coming in at 32 milliseconds. So for shooting action silently or for shooting video, the a6700 is the best choice.
Next, we're going to test each camera with portraits, but first we want to take a second to thank our sponsor, Adorama.
We've been professional photographers for decades, and we trust Adorama to provide all of our equipment for us, to give us the best prices, to give us immediate shipping. And Adorama actually makes the flashpoint gear that we use for our lighting, and we have trusted for years.
Not only that, they have the deal of the day, which I love to go check and see what's on sale. They have really cool stuff on there. They even have a members program where the more you buy, the more you save. You get points, you can save money. It's fun to shop there. It's trustworthy. They have good shipping and they have a ton of gear, so check them out.
Be sure to use our links just to let Adorama know that you want more unbiased reviews like this. Thanks for sponsoring us, Adorama. Now let's take a few pictures, and since I had to do the running in the heat, you have to pose for the photos now.
I get to pose after the heat, okay.
I've attached each manufacturer's 50mm f1.2, and that might be overkill for these cameras, but I really want to make sure that the focusing is completely accurate, determine whether or not it's focusing on the iris rather than the eyelashes, and let's take a look at the results. Examining the portrait image quality, I cannot see any difference. There's no difference in skin tones. Even zooming in 400%, I can't see any difference in detail. Instead of upgrading, you might be better off putting that money towards one of the flashpoint strobes from Adorama. Comparing the Canon to the Canon skin tones are a little bit greener, though that's easy to fix in post. Overall, again, I think this is a tie between the R7 and the 6700. Both are great for portraits. Tight headshots at 50 f1.2 is extremely challenging for any camera, and we were extremely nitpicky, requiring sharp autofocus on the irises. The a6600 returned about 61% of those shots in focus, but the a6700 was a big improvement with 87% of shots in focus. The Canon R7 lagged behind, frequently catching focus on the eyelashes instead of the iris itself, but it still turned out a respectable 63% in focus. One big difference between the two Sony cameras and the Canon is that the Canon has a sync speed of 1/320th, while the two Sonys have a sync speed of 1/60th. That means the Canon is a full stop faster. The sync speed is the fastest shutter speed that you can use without having to switch into high-speed sync mode on your strobes. I don't like to use the high-speed sync mode because that slows down the recharge time on the batteries. It means you can't shoot as fast. It means your batteries run out faster. And having a slower sync speed means you're letting in more ambient light, which means you have less control over the light. And especially shooting at f1.2 here, I needed a fast shutter speed. So that ended up being kind of a win for the Canon if you do studio portrait work. Now I'm in my extremely dark basement to test the sensor stabilization on each of the cameras. I'm using an unstabilized 50mm f1.2, and I'm just going to handhold a subject at slower and slower shutter speeds. And then I meticulously look at every picture to determine whether or not the camera was able to eliminate my shaking hands. And then I chart it out so we can determine which camera is going to be best shooting long exposures. This is super useful if you're doing still lifes in low light environments like this and you want the cleanest image quality possible. But it's also really powerful for things like concerts where you can drag the shutter, use a long shutter speed to show the strumming of a musician playing the guitar or a drummer's hands moving. You can capture movement in low light conditions without shakiness. The a6600, well, it did okay. You could still get most shots sharp, about 3.5 stops below the reciprocal rule. With the a6700, we saw a little improvement, but it's probably not worth upgrading. The Canon R7 was a little bit better still, but again, the difference wasn't big enough to really make your decision based on this. And now for the video test, I'm going to test the eye autofocus tracking, I think the most useful scenario. This is not really a cinema camera, but it does have a lot of kind of cinema camera features, but I'm recording in 4K 60, 422 10-bit. I can clearly see that it's focusing on my eye, but it's missing some of the cinema camera features, like it doesn't have the red box around it while it's recording. Let's see how it handles introducing a new subject to focus on the foreground. The a6700 had the best video autofocus of the bunch, smoothly pulling focus directly to my eye with no hunting in the background or foreground. This is the a6600, and it does not have a flip screen, so I have no idea if I'm even in the frame. That's one of the big changes from the a6600 to the a6700. You can flip the screen forward and now see yourself. The a6600 also doesn't support 4K 60, so you're limited to 4K 30. Overall, the a6700, a much stronger video camera. The a6600 is totally acceptable, but it does pulse from the background to my nose before finally landing on my eye. And this is the Canon R7. We totally trust Canon's dual pixel autofocus system to keep me in focus. Let's see how it handles putting something else in the frame. Oh, I gotta use the same thing or people will claim I'm rigging the test. Surprisingly, the Canon's video autofocus wasn't as nice. It sometimes pulsed all the way to the background before popping back to my eyes, and it was generally kind of jerky. Now let's see how each of the cameras performed in low light at ISO 12800. I shot these at 50mm, but their angle of view is different because the a6600 crops in 1.23 times and does not do 4K 60 at all. The R7 has a slightly smaller sensor. That's a win for the a6700 shooters who want to shoot a little bit wider. Zooming in to look at the noise, you'll see that the a6700 wins pretty big here. It's reading every pixel and then downsampling it. The R7 has to skip pixels using pixel binning, and the a6600 is actually cropping in, so it's not using all of its sensors, and this adds up to a cleaner image about the difference between full frame and APS-C. So for low light shooters, the a6700 is a big win.
I want to talk about something really important, Tony, because the Canon is performing well in all of these tests, but when it comes to lens selection, they only have 3 lenses specifically designed for this APS-C system. They also don't let you cooperate with third-party lenses, which means that your lens choice is limited.
Think through the entire set of cameras and bodies that you're going to buy before you invest in any one of these systems. But overall, Sony has a much bigger infrastructure. We're going to wrap this up, tell you what camera to buy. But first, I want to thank our sponsor, Adorama, one more time. The place to shop for anything photography or videography related, not just these cameras and lenses, but your lights, strobes, continuous lights, camera bags, tripods.
They have a bit of everything. It's fun to shop and see what they have, and they have great deals all of the time. Their shipping is fast.
When you use our link, you let Adorama know that you heard about it through us, and that helps make these sort of unbiased reviews possible. First question, if you're an a6600 shooter, do you think it's worth upgrading to the a6700?
Depends on what you are taking pictures of, because the autofocusing system is so much better if you don't want to miss shots for wildlife, sports, or even portraits where there's more moving, maybe in family portraits you're taking, you got some kids moving around. I would go for this.
Right.
And you get the touch screen, you get the nicer ergonomics. I think that it's a good upgrade.
Totally agree, but it's probably not going to change the quality of your pictures, and if you're not struggling with anything on the a6600 now, you might wait until you could jump all the way to full frame, because that would make a big difference. What about the Canon R7 here? What if they're choosing between Sony and Canon? Oh, that Canon was good.
If you're already a Canon shooter and you like the system, I think you will be more comfortable with Canon, obviously, but like we said, the lens selection is going to be more limited. I think if you're a person that puts like 1 or 2 lenses on and doesn't care about getting photos that have unique looks from unique lenses, this could be perfect for you. But if you want more variety and versatility, I would go with the Sony.
For me, if I was a sports or wildlife photographer, I think I'd pick the Canon.
Because you have more frames.
Yeah, but for video, landscapes, portraits, you have more lenses, and those are going to matter more, and you'll get more out of the Sony system, and it's equally capable for those things. So it depends what you're shooting. But I do want to throw in one more surprise contender.
What?
The full frame Canon R8. It's about the same price. It's very capable for sports, portraits, landscapes, travel, just about anything.
Why would someone want a full frame sensor over the APS-C sensor?
It's mostly because the camera manufacturers make their best glass for full frame, the pro glass, the higher quality glass. So you can get better results. You can get better low light performance. You can get shallower depth of field. And generally you just have more lens options, especially within the Canon system. So it's really tough for me to recommend somebody cross-shopping the a6700 and the R8 to recommend them the Sony. But you should watch a review of the Canon R8 and take it into consideration, because it's not the same camera and it's not a Sony, but it is really good.
If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We have reviews, we have tutorials, we have news, everything photo related. And if you subscribe, you'll get notifications when we have a new video. So thanks.
Bye.